Good morning from the Freedom of Information and Privacy Association. I'm Patrick Farnsworth, and this is your Access and Privacy Online News Summary for Saturday, September 13th. We're back after a late summer break, and while we were away, the news didn't stop. In today's review, we'll cover major Canadian access to information and whistleblower stories, a worrying update on the Nova Scotia Power cyberattack, and a hard-hitting Associated Press investigation into how American tech companies help build China's surveillance state. Let's dive in. We start in Nova Scotia, where Freedom of Information requests revealed that the public housing waitlist has grown past 8,000 people, a jump from 1,200 in less than a year. Seniors make up nearly half the applicants, highlighting how rising rents and weak rent controls are pushing people into crisis. The documents recently released to the NDP placed the number of senior applicants on the list aged 58 or above at 47%. Colton LeBlanc, the Growth and Development Minister responsible for the Nova Scotia Provincial Housing Agency, said that not everyone on the waitlist needs immediate housing. He also said that some are already supported through programs like Rent Supplement, but join the list as a first step. LeBlanc added that applicants facing urgent situations such as houselessness or domestic violence are prioritized and moved up to the top of the list. In Ontario, Anushka Yadav, LGI reporter at The Pointer, brings us a story focused on how Premier Doug Ford is moving ahead with Highway 413, despite years of expert findings that will do little to ease congestion. The executive director of Environmental Defense told The Pointer the only way to solve the traffic issue is to massively invest in public transit. Before construction was announced, the GO Transit expansion was quietly canceled, with the PC government having offered no public explanation, and staff working on the project have reportedly been let go. Early works are underway, but critics warn of environmental damage, skyrocketing costs, and misuse of Freedom of Information exemptions to hide key details from the public. In Springwater, Ontario, Wayne Doyle, LGI reporter at Barrie Today, uncovered heated disputes over boundary map changes with Barrie, where councillors were calling for forensic IT audits to uncover how unapproved mapping ends up in public planning. Deputy Mayor George Cabral wants the findings of the audits reported back to council at its regular meetings on October 15th. Additionally, Cabral wants the October 15 report to include a cache of all documents, including copies of documents obtained in the search. Springwater Mayor Jennifer Coughlin considered the motion a personal attack and said residents have the right to the truth, but not at the expense of the taxpayers. Coughlin made Cabral an offer, saying if the audits say she's done something wrong, she'll pay for it, but if they come clean, he pays for it, not the taxpayers. Shifting to the federal level, Canada's Integrity Commissioner says her office is overwhelmed. Whistleblower complaints are surging, from workplace abuses to financial mismanagement. But under-resourcing means many files may never see daylight, threatening trust in federal accountability systems. Commissioner Harriet Soloway told the Canadian press her office has received 380 submissions so far this year, including 78 claims of reprisals and 302 claims of wrongdoing, while also 220 files are still awaiting analysis. Many of the submissions the office receives don't fall within its mandate, Soloway said, adding that most submissions contain multiple allegations. She said only a small percentage of findings of wrongdoing result in a report to Parliament. Looking internationally, but with a Canadian lead role, Rochelle Baker, LGI reporter at Canada's National Observer, brings us a report from documents obtained under Access to Information that show Ottawa wants to use its G7 presidency to push global cooperation on using artificial intelligence to monitor oceans. A forum to discuss global AI ocean applications is slated for November, an Internal Fisheries and Oceans Canada DFO memo suggests. According to a ministry email, the meeting will talk about possible new approaches, adoptions, and uses of emerging technologies. This will include data requirements, technology and infrastructure requirements, performance capacity and training, validation and security. Advocates say Canada could lead in applying AI to track fish stocks, biodiversity, and even illegal fishing, but the window for action is closing fast. Back in Ottawa, NDP MP Jenny Kwan is calling for tighter controls on Canadian arms exports to Israel. She says a loophole allows U.S. purchases of Canadian-made weapons to bypass Canada's restrictions and end up in the conflict, undermining commitments to international law. Kwan said she will table a bill later this month to end that workaround. The proposal comes amid growing scrutiny of Canada's role in global arms flows, with criticism last fall when the United States announced plans to send Quebec-made ammunition to Israel, a sale that Ottawa said ultimately did not proceed. Kwan said Ottawa needs to be far more transparent about its arms exports and apply the same scrutiny to exports made through the United States that it would for arms destined for any other country. Documents unearthed by activists through Access to Information law suggest Canada issued 2 new export permits in February for sending arms to Israel, despite the government saying it would respect the non-binding March 2024 motion in Parliament halting new arms permits for Israel. Turning to privacy, we start in New Brunswick, where Elections NB is warning that outdated systems and weak privacy rules threaten free and fair voting. The agency highlights the risk of foreign and domestic disinformation campaigns supercharged by artificial intelligence and propelled by social media, weak voter data safeguards, and inadequate training for candidates handling personal information, echoing many of FIPA's own recommendations earlier this year. Giving an example of how disinformation could be spread, the chief electoral officer said it's not illegal under New Brunswick law to send out fake information on the date of the election. In Nova Scotia, Halifax Mayor Andy Fillmore faces a code of conduct investigation after making misleading claims about his role versus the city's chief administrator. Fillmore told the CBC earlier this summer that the mayor reports to the chief administrative officer, who he says holds power. Critics say the mayor's comments risk undermining public understanding of municipal governance. The Canadian press has reviewed emails obtained by residents from an independent consulting confirming that their complaints have merit, and as a result, Fillmore is under investigation. In British Columbia, Patrick Penner, LGI reporter at the Tri-Cities Dispatch, details how a Port Moody daycare project, owned by a recent immigrated couple, has spiraled into lawsuits, contract fights, and defamation claims. In the civil claim, the couple alleged the business people tied to the construction and management of the proposed daycare persuaded them into unfair contracts, mismanaged the build, locked them out of business records, and spread falsehoods that blocked their efforts to relocate. At the heart of the dispute are allegations of misused personal information, unfair contracts, and exploitation of immigrant entrepreneurs. The case underscores how privacy concerns can spill into community-level disputes. Meanwhile, federally, Ottawa confirmed that a cyberattack exposed phone numbers and email addresses tied to Canada Revenue Agency, Unemployment and Social Development Canada, and Canada Border Services Agency accounts. The government says Two Keys Corporation, the provider of a multi-factor authentication application used for the accounts, discovered the incident, promptly informed the government, and launched an investigation, which is being conducted with external cybersecurity experts. The Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat says a routine software update caused a vulnerability that allowed a malicious actor to access the information. While officials insist no sensitive personal data was compromised, the breach shows ongoing vulnerabilities in government authentication systems. In other data breach news, we go back to the East Coast, where the fallout from the March cyber attack on Nova Scotia Power is looking worse than first thought. The utility now says all customers may have been affected, with personal data including social insurance numbers and banking information potentially exposed. The report, parts of which have been redacted, also says the utility has no way of telling an individual customer what specific information has been stolen from them. The company has said the ransomware attack resulted in some personal information being posted on the dark web. Credit monitoring has been extended to 5 years, but the full scope remains unclear. From a FIPA perspective, it is important to highlight that offering credit monitoring, even extending it to 5 years, is no longer sufficient in these matters. When breached, personal information like SIN numbers are being used to cause material harm through identity theft years and in some cases decades after the initial breach. An extra year or two of credit monitoring is important. However, it does little to recognize the costs, whether preventative or reactive, that an individual person faces when identity theft occurs. It is high time that the company or public body bears the full cost for the person to address identity theft when it occurs because it is a breach of their personal information beyond their control. South of the border, the Trump administration is pushing the Supreme Court to let the president fire federal trade commissioners at will, a move that could unravel decades of precedent protecting independent regulators. The Justice Department argues that the FTC and other executive branch agencies are under Trump's control, and the president is free to remove commissioners without cause. Chief Justice John Roberts has already allowed the firing of Rebecca Slaughter on Monday. The fight over the president's power to fire could prompt the court to consider overturning a 90-year-old Supreme Court decision, known as Humphrey's Executor. In that case from 1935, the court unanimously held that presidents cannot fire independent board members without cause. At the same time, immigration enforcement in Los Angeles has intensified under Trump, with raids carried out at car washes, construction sites, and even Home Depot parking lots. Civil rights groups are challenging the operations as racial profiling, while Trump allies praise them as proof of tough border policy. The head of immigration enforcement in LA dismissed allegations of profiling, saying he identifies targets based on intelligence. He also defended the optional use of masks for agents who fear that being identified may jeopardize their personal safety. Meanwhile, the Justice Department is floating an idea that has sparked outrage across the political spectrum, restricting transgender Americans from owning firearms. Advocates warn it's unconstitutional and dangerous, targeting a vulnerable population while doing little to address gun violence overall. Some conservative figures have played with the idea of restricting guns for people diagnosed with gender dysphoria through a federal law that bars people from possessing firearms if they are, quote, adjudicated as a mental defective, end quote. The Trump administration has targeted transgender people in several ways, including removing them from military service, scrubbing some federal websites of mentions of them, trying to bar changing the sex marker on passports, and seeking personal information on gender-affirming care patients from doctors and clinics. Shifting to other international stories, a San Francisco jury has ordered Google to pay $425.7 million for illegally tracking nearly 100 million smartphones despite users opting out of personalization. A Google spokesperson said the decision misunderstands how the products work, and that the company will appeal it. Google had denied that it was improperly tracking the online activity of people who thought they had shielded themselves with privacy controls. The lawyers who had filed the case had argued Google had used the data they collected off smartphones without users' permission to help sell ads tailored to users' individual interests, a strategy that resulted in the company reaping billions in additional revenue. In Australia, the High Court has shut down decorated veteran Ben Roberts-Smith's final appeal, leaving in place findings that he unlawfully killed civilians in Afghanistan. The High Court decision leaves Australia's most decorated living war veteran with no more legal options in a defamation case he started in 2018 when newspapers accused him of a range of war crimes. The decision closes a long legal battle that began with whistleblower leaks and reinforces the role of access to information in uncovering wartime abuses. And finally, an Associated Press investigation reveals how American tech companies helped build China's surveillance state. Over decades, firms like IBM, Dell, and Cisco provided software and hardware that enabled predictive policing, mass detentions, and the monitoring of entire communities, including Uyghurs in Xinjiang. The AP found Chinese police and state-owned defense contractors partnered with American tech firms, especially IBM, to design China's surveillance apparatus from the top down. The AP found evidence that U.S. technology remains deeply embedded in China's systems today, raising profound questions about global accountability. As always, we hope today's stories help you stay informed about the latest issues surrounding privacy, information management, and public transparency. Back from a late summer break, we'll be running a separate episode to bring us up to date reviewing the stories while we were away. Be sure to stay tuned to this space for that in the week ahead. To help us keep the mics on, be sure to subscribe to FIBA News Monitoring or consider a donation. Our writer is Sean Fisk. Original music for today's show comes from Breakmaster Cylinder. I'm Patrick Farnsworth, your host and producer. Thank you for joining. A big FIBA thank you to all the contributors, reporters, and outlets that make this podcast possible, and to you, our listeners. Stay safe and stay informed.